Chapter 16, Emotional and Social Development in Middle Adulthood. Okay, we begin chapter 16 with Erikson, as we begin every chapter on social and emotional development, generativity versus stagnation. Now, just to back up, remember adolescence, the stage of development Erikson talked about was identity versus role confusion, getting a sense of who you are. As a young adult, in early adulthood, your 20s and 30s, Erikson said you were focused on intimacy versus isolation, building a close relationship in a family. Now, in the mid-years, 40s and 50s, Erikson says, the focus shifts from yourself, building up your own career and family, to others. Generativity, reaching out to others in ways that give to and guide the next generation, extending your commitment beyond just yourself and your partner and your family. This can be realized through parenting with your children or your other family work or mentoring relationships or community volunteering. Generativity has the word generation in it. To generate is to make, to create. And generations, one of the things we create are people for the next generation. But whether or not we have our own children, we can be generative, we can look to the future generations and our impact on them in these other ways. So Erikson says generativity is particularly important in midlife because it's a point of reevaluation. We look back on our life and we think, what's going to be my legacy? What am I going to leave behind for the future? If we wait too long to do that into old age, there's no time to make changes and make sure we are leaving the legacy we want. People who don't think about this, Erikson said, but who remain self-absorbed, are going to be stagnant, stuck. They show lack of interest in younger people. They only focus on what they can get from people, not what they can give. And so they have little interest in being productive. And they're not happy as a result. Okay. Highly generative adults, people who are successful in this process, tend to be well-adjusted. They have low anxiety and depression. They feel autonomy or independence. They accept themselves and they're satisfied with life. And they tell what we call a commitment story, a positive interpretation of life events, being able to see the learning experience even in bad things. They view it as good. They view good as coming from adversity. Good things can come from trouble, and they believe in giving back to their family, to community, to society. Now, Levinson, remember, when we left Levinson and his theory of seasons of adult life, we were in the age 30 transition. Back then, we were worried about solidifying our dream, and those would include career goals and family goals. Now, in midlife, Levinson says we have 4 basic tasks of this transition point, this very important transition point to the 40s and 50s. And he described this transition point as 4 tasks, each of which involves our balancing 2 things, sort of balancing past and present, self and others, etc. And the sense of balance is an important idea in midlife. It actually comes not from Levinson or even Erikson, but from Carl Jung, who talked about our personality reaching its level of balance in midlife. And many psychologists took this idea and went further with it in their theories, and Levinson was one. So what are we balancing in midlife? First, we're balancing young and old. We're balancing our youth with our old age. Remember the discussion question? Is midlife the end of youth or the beginning of old age? That's a question Levinson says we have to figure out. And we have to figure it out by finding the balance, by saying, well, it's both and it's neither. So you need to seek new ways of being young and new ways to accept being a little bit older. So you don't want to say, oh, I'm 40, I can't do anything anymore. But you need to find ways to be young in ways that are appropriate for your age and comfortable for your age. And you need to accept the changes you can't do anything about, which mean you're getting older. Destruction, creation. Destruction, what he means by destruction are the negative things from our past that continue to eat away at us, that make us mad. Hurtful things that people did to us, or perhaps that we did to them. We have to acknowledge that. He's not saying forget about it altogether. You have to acknowledge that it happened. But then you have to create. You have to balance that with creation. Instead of being stuck on, oh, I'm mad at this person, I'm mad at that person, this didn't work out, that one didn't work out. You have to begin to focus on the positives and repair relationships so that you can leave a legacy for future generations. The third one comes directly from Jung, and that's a balance of the masculine and feminine parts of the self. We talk about getting in touch with your feminine or your masculine sides, and this is where that phrase comes from. Both Levinson and Jung believe that in midlife we are more balanced in these traits. We're less worried if we're men and seeming macho, and if we're women, we're less concerned in seeming ultra feminine. We accept both sides of our personality, which creates a better balance and more comfort and independence with ourselves. We don't worry what others think as much. And finally, engagement separateness. We balance our engagement with the world and other people, our obligations, our wanting to be busy, go, 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 with separateness, with some time for ourselves, with some time to think about what we want. Okay, again, Vaillant we're going to go over a little bit less. His is an older theory, but these are very, very nice ideas that he had. In midlife, keepers of meaning, people begin to act as guardians of the culture, and this particularly moves into old age, and it fits in with Erikson's ideas of generativity, of passing the torch to the next generation and focusing on less personal goals, more long-term goals. Okay, the midlife crisis. Your discussion board is about the midlife crisis, and this slide is about the midlife crisis. First of all, the big question, does everybody have one? The easy answer, no, everybody doesn't have one. There are big individual differences in response to midlife, and mostly it's not a big crisis. However, as it says, sharp disruption is uncommon. It's uncommon to completely throw everything away and change your life. And that's probably not a great sign if you do that. It shows some unhappiness. However, everybody should be doing some midlife evaluation, some rethinking, some tweaking. There are gender differences in when this turning point, this, oh my gosh, what am I doing, happens for men and women. In women, it tends to happen in early adulthood. Women initially might focus on family and then say, wait a minute, am I putting enough in my career? That being forced to balance career and family can make women think about this earlier. For men, midlife tends to be the time they reevaluate a career. Wow, I had this dream. Where did it go? Have I gotten as far as I wish to get? People have differences in how they handle regrets, things they wish were different. Do they make life changes or not? Do they accept things that happened? How do they interpret what happened? This interpretation and acceptance has a lot to do with how happy they'll be in midlife. Okay. The stage view versus the life events view. This is basically a stage theory view versus social clock. In the stage view, your Erikson, your Levinson, midlife changes are developmental transitions, meaning everybody must go through midlife changes at around the same time. A life events view says, no, if we make changes in midlife, then we're adapting to what happened to us, to life events. And the reason people seem similar is only because similar things happen to us in midlife. And of course, it's a combination. All right, possible selves. This is a very interesting theory of personality by someone named Hazel Marcus, who talked about our personality as a set of selves. Each of us has our real self, our self-concept, what we actually think of ourselves. We have an ideal self, something we wish we could become, which is a possible self. Hopefully it's a realistic ideal. And we also have feared selves, possible futures that we'd rather not have. And all of these are possibilities for us in the future. A similar idea to Levinson's dream, where we actually picture ourselves in the future. But Marcus is saying, Levinson focuses on the one ideal that we want, and Marcus says we all think about a bunch of things that could possibly happen to us down the road. Now, and some of those are about what we wish we were, others what we're afraid we might become. Now, as you get older, obviously the possibilities are fewer, right? It's not like at 40 or 50, I still have infinite possibilities. I've gone down a life path, I've closed off some things, and therefore I have fewer possible selves, and they're more concrete, meaning more realistic. And they rely more on time comparisons, age comparisons, rather than social comparisons. So rather than comparing myself to my friends, I might be comparing myself to my age group. Well, considering I'm 40 or considering I'm 50, how am I doing? But these also play a protective role in self-esteem. Obviously, what we imagine for ourselves in the future, unless we're very nervous and imagine terrible things, these can protect our self-esteem. Okay. Self-acceptance, autonomy, and mastery of the environment. These are things that tend to grow and improve in midlife, and many, many people say they are happiest in midlife. We are more expert at things that are important to us. We're better at problem solving. We have a better idea of ourselves, a better integrated and complex self-description, self-concept. We understand, in other words, we know ourselves best. And therefore, we accept ourselves better. We feel more autonomous, more independent, and we feel that we can master our environment, that we can succeed in our environment. And this all contributes to well-being, although cohorts differ. So in other words, depending on how your cohort, your age group, views middle age, that's going to depend upon your well-being and how you see your self-acceptance. All right, daily stressors. Daily stressors for women and men tend to decrease in middle adulthood, probably because people are better at brushing off some of the smaller stressors. People get better at coping over time. All right, so what makes us happy in midlife? Good health, exercise, sense of control, personal life investment, meaning I feel in control of my life and I'm invested, I'm committed to making it work well. Good social relationships, a good intimate relationships, able to handle multiple roles well. How should you improve coping in middle adulthood? Good coping strategies, look for the positives, evaluate your alternatives, don't act quickly. Personality changes that can help you cope. Having a more complex, better understanding of yourself and your strengths and weaknesses, emotional stability and confidence. Gender identity. As we said, there's a better balance. Women can express their masculine traits, can show independence, can be assertive. Men can show their caring, their vulnerabilities. Why? Different theories. Could be a cohort effect that as women have career experiences, women get better at showing these masculine traits. The demands of midlife, things you have to do in midlife, force us to be less worried about gender stereotypes. The parental imperative, meaning as we parent our children, we learn to focus on a better balance. The big 5 personality traits. Now, this is a theory of personality which you'll study in depth in personality psychology class, Psych 334 here at York, if you take that. If you're a psych major, you will be taking it. What this theory basically says is it's possible to describe someone's personality, to explain who they are and understand them, based upon where they fit in each of these 5 traits. So in other words, it's not saying that some people have one and other people have the other. Each of us have some level of these 5 traits, and by describing ourselves on each of them in combination, are we high or low in neuroticism, which means emotional instability or stability, extroversion, being outgoing, liking a lot of action and noise, versus introversion, shy and quiet. Openness to experience, liking to try new things and meet new people, being open-minded versus rigid or inflexible, closed to experience. Agreeableness, being a compromiser, pleasant, easy to get along with, versus disagreeableness, difficult, wants your own way. And conscientiousness, following rules, doing what you're supposed to do, being reliable versus being sloppy and late and unreliable. So each of us falls somewhere closer to one end or the other or in the middle on each of these 5 things. And together, these researchers argue that number 1, they can describe a personality and they can compare one person to another to understand perhaps what job a person would be best at, what type of person they are. Now, the research on the Big 5 personality traits actually was done in that Baltimore longitudinal study I told you about. And the researchers who came up with it, McCrae and Costa, were especially interested in aging, in personality in adulthood and in old age. We have a lot of stereotypes about personality, that old people become more stubborn, become more set in their ways, become rigid, become disagreeable. And it turns out that pretty much none of that is true. First of all, our basic personality is very stable. After the age of 30, there can be definitely some change in personality, but for most people, very little. The changes that occur are in acceptance and organization and balance in the personality. And as a result of that, our agreeableness, our ability to compromise and get along with people, tends to increase a little bit. Our conscientiousness, our reliability, neatness, following rules, doing what we're supposed to do, increases a little bit with age and maturity. Neuroticism can decline. We become less high-strung, less emotionally unstable, less high maintenance. And extroversion, meaning being outgoing, energetic, liking a lot of noise and action, and openness to experience, how flexible we are, they remain the same, or they can decrease slightly in some people, but certainly not to the degree that the stereotype argues. Okay, relationships at midlife. This is a period of close relationships. We have ties going up to the older generation as well as going down to the younger generation. Hopefully we have our well-established friendships. And by the way, does it matter if we spend most of our time with family or friends? In fact, it doesn't. Some people, their best friends are their family, and that's great. Some people, their best friends are outside the family, and that's great. It only matters that we have relationships and that they're good and positive, not how many and not who. It can be a liberating time for many at midlife. You feel complete, you feel you've completed things, and it gives you time as your kids get older and need you less to strengthen your friendships and go back to interests and hobbies that you didn't have time for when you were younger. Okay, marriage or committed relationships in middle adulthood. If people live together, their household is better off financially in middle adulthood. You've saved some money, hopefully. As your kids leave, your expenses begin to decrease. You have a little more saved up, etc. You're probably, hopefully, a little smarter with your money. A modern view of marriage in midlife is that you should expand the relationship, not in terms of looking for new people, but new horizons, new activities together. You may need a time for review and adjustment. Once the kids leave, what does that mean for us? Now you're spending time together. And having a satisfying relationship predicts physical and mental health, so it's important to do. Now, some people divorce in midlife. This mainly happens when the unhappiness was before, but they're waiting for the kids to be grown. It more likely is going to happen among those who are already in their second marriage. Once you've divorced, you're more likely to divorce again, unfortunately. And people who are educated, probably because they can afford it, more likely to divorce. Midlifers adjust more easily than young adults to divorce, probably because the kids are not small and because they may have better problem-solving skills. However, if a couple was traditional, Then divorce in midlife means women end up with much less money because they have less time in to the workforce than the husband had. Parenting in middle adulthood. This is the time when your kids are adolescents, which initially can be difficult, but then you're probably launching them on their way, letting go of them. And this is a process that can be difficult for people. Your authority declines. You can't really tell them what to do in the way you could when they were kids. But you have continued contact and affection. And for the most part, it's parents who continue to support children well into old age. As your children marry or move in with someone, you have to get used to in-laws. And mothers become the kin keeper, giving a call. Hey, did you remember to call your brother and wish him a happy birthday? Hey, remember that Thanksgiving you're supposed to bring the soup or whatever. Did you call your cousins, etc. A kin keeper also is the one who has the Thanksgiving or Christmas or holiday dinner. Okay, parenting in midlife is affected by how invested you are in your other roles like work and your children's characteristics. If your children are off time, meaning your children have not moved out, have not found a relationship, have not gone to school, or if you have children who continue to need you, children with disabilities, that can be stressful. And of course, there are big cultural variations in when all this is appropriate to do. Promoting positive ties with your adult children, positive communication. Don't go back to the same old from childhood. Accept their changes in their cultural values and lifestyle. You cannot shape them. You gave them their values. You send them on your way. If they do things you'd rather they didn't do, as long as they're legal, how much control do you really have? If you want to have a good relationship with them, it's important to accept the lifestyle they've chosen. Resist the urge to fix their problems. They need to be able to make their own decisions and grow up. And finally, you need to be clear about your own needs and preferences. This accepting them doesn't mean letting them walk all over you. You don't have to be their babysitter. You don't have to hand them over money. You don't have to do their laundry unless you want to. Grandparenthood. This usually begins sometime in the 50s on average, obviously in some families and cultures earlier and some later. And as people live longer, we can spend an awful lot of time as a grandparent. Grandparenting styles are influenced by proximity. How close do you live to the kids? How old you are. If you're younger, you can be more active with them. Gender, obviously, grandmothers get more involved. Socioeconomic status, and ethnicity, big cultural differences. What are the trends in grandparenting today? The extended family household. Because of the economy, a lot of times kids are moving back in with their kids. Skip generation families. In some families, the children can't care for the children, and so the grandparents are caring for the children. And if the grandchildren's parents are divorced, this can affect the access of the grandparent to the children. What are the meanings of grandparenthood? What's the good part? Being a valued elder. Immortality through descendants, meaning I feel like I'm going to live on. Grandchildren are a nice legacy. Re-involvement with your past, being able to tell stories of your past to your grandchildren, remembering how nice it was to have kids around, and the ability to indulge them. In other words, to be the one that spoils them, sugars them up, and then says, you take them. What are the influences of frequency on grandchildren's visits? The mother's mother obviously gets the most attention. And then the father's mother, and then the mother's father, and then the father's father. And that's a gender role thing in our society. Children and their aging parents. Excuse me, I'm going to turn my air conditioner on. Oops, I can't. Hang on. Okay, middle-aged children and their aging parents. We call this the sandwich generation, the people in the middle. They're responsible for their own kids and also sometimes for their parents. Now, when parents are still healthy, elders, it can be a very, very positive relationship. You reassess your relationship with your parents. You relate to them as a grown-up. In collectivist cultures, meaning cultures that value the family group, parents will typically live with married children, whereas in individualistic cultures like America, the parents typically choose themselves to live on their own to be more independent. But children do provide more help to their parents, financial help, household help, caregiving if their health requires it. And obviously, the better your relationship in the past, the easier this will be to establish, this caregiving relationship. All right, as I said, caring for aging parents who are sick makes people feel squished in the middle of responsibilities like a sandwich. Finances, if you can afford some help, that's better. Location, if you're near them, you're probably doing more day-to-day things. On the other hand, if you're far from them, that could make things harder. Your gender, it's mostly the women, mostly daughters who help, or daughters-in-law. And of course, culture dictates, do you get help, do you do it yourself, etc. It can be highly stressful. 10 to 20 hours per week, women do more. Women feel more guilty hiring someone to do the help, so they end up doing it themselves. And sometimes that's not a good thing. Sometimes you'd be better off hiring somebody. They're stronger and younger and can do it better. It's hard to watch your parents' declining health, and it's harder to live with the ill parent than to be able to go home to your own place. Okay. How do you relieve the stress of caregiving? Effective coping, social support, using your resources, getting help, and of course, improving public policies, getting better elder care and better funding for elder care so people don't go broke. Siblings. Contact and support can decline between siblings in midlife if you have a lot of demands on your plate. However, especially if you're both sharing taking care of your parents, they can feel much closer. The baby boom cohort are more expressive, meaning they feel more confident and comfortable saying what's on their mind, and they can share similar events as siblings. Obviously, it's affected by culture and also by earlier relationships. If you got along well before, you'll continue to get along well now. Gender trends continue in midlife friendships. Men are less expressive, less talkers than women. Women tend to still have those talking, emotionally sharing relationships, men the doing relationships. Midlife people tend to make their friendship circles smaller. If you go on Facebook, you're less likely to see a 50-year-old with that 600, 700 number. Not because they don't have too many friends. Obviously, not all 600 can be your real friends. In midlife, people begin to realize that they want to be picky. They want to be selective. They want to start shedding those relationships that are too much work or that don't fulfill them. And they try harder to get along with their friends. There's less conflict. They rely on friends for pleasure, family for support, although that varies a lot by individual and culture. Work life, very important. You try to get more meaning out of your work life. You try to improve your job performance. Why? Because you've been doing this a long time and you might as well enjoy it. You might as well take it seriously. Midlife people call in sick less often. They're less likely to say, I'm hungover, I'm going to call in sick, or I'm going to stay out late and then call in sick. They collaborate well with colleagues, and therefore they're happier with their jobs. However, people in midlife, particularly as you get into the 50s, can start to run into some discrimination. You're not going to be here that much longer. Why should I promote you? And that's something that we're going to have to fight against and change. All right, so as you can see here, in terms of job satisfaction, it actually can kind of go down in the 30s and 40s, maybe as you're rethinking or trying to establish yourself, but then it starts going up. Okay, hopefully by now I found my niche. However, there are some jobs that cause something called burnout. These are jobs that are high stress, jobs that have high emotional demands, jobs where the work environment doesn't support you. Too much work for the time available and a lack of encouragement from supervisors. And that makes you feel depressed. It makes you have poor job performance. It makes you have poor attention and memory. A person's burnt out when you come into a place and you come up and say, hi, I'm here for whatever I'm here for, and they look at you with an eye roll and say, go sit down, I'll call you. That person's probably burnt out. Happens a lot in high-stress jobs like emergency rooms, EMS, sometimes teachers, especially in schools that are very stressful, people who work in jails. Also people who work in really crappy jobs, like people who work in the post office. There's apparently a poor work environment there. And so you get that bad attitude, the DMV, motor vehicles. And it leads to absenteeism and turnover. So obviously, how do you prevent burnout? Make these the opposite. Give support and encouragement. Make sure people have enough time to do their work. Limit the emotional demands. Rotate people off a high-stress assignment to allow people to avoid burnout. All right, career development. Limits to advancement. If you're not as highly trained as newer people coming in, that might limit your advancement. And then there's something called the glass ceiling. Okay, glass is see-through, but it's hard. So what that means is the glass ceiling is when people say you can get ahead, but really you can't, right? So they're saying, oh no, there's no ceiling there, but you're banging on it and you can't get through. So what's a pretend? We pretend it's not there. This is any kind of real discrimination. It's illegal to say women can't get ahead in this company, or African Americans or immigrants can't get ahead in this company. It's illegal, so we pretend we don't say it, but yet those people are banging on the ceiling and say, ooh, I can't really be promoted. So that's a limitation. And that's going to have to change, both with changes in the law and also, as we said earlier, changes in who the bosses are. As more people get through the glass ceiling, they can start bringing other women, other minorities up with them. Midlife career changes, often people move down. They move to a more relaxing career, especially those people who had burnout and high stress. So a person will say, okay, I've been a cop, let me retire, take something a little easier. Midlife unemployment is a real problem. It's more stressful because you have fewer opportunities to get a new job. People either say you're overqualified, they're not going to hire you for an entry-level job, but they're also not necessarily going to hire you at the same money you made. And so middle-aged and older people have a harder time finding a new job. All the while, they have more bills, more responsibility, so it's rough. Retirement planning. Midlife, even though you're not retiring, is the time to start planning ahead for retirement. Okay. What makes people interested in advancing and getting better training even in midlife? The desire to change, to have growth, if their coworkers and supervisors encourage them, if they feel greater self-efficacy. If they want to move into a job with more challenging tasks, work with better coworkers, work as part of a team, this could make them want to get more training. All right, the glass ceiling we already went over. We already went over midlife unemployment. And now, retirement planning. What are you planning for? Well, of course, you plan for finances. Make sure you have enough money, know where your money's coming from. But you also want to plan for some other things. Fitness. Are you going to be healthy enough to enjoy it? Role adjustment. Are you going to get used to not working? What are you going to do to feel like you have purpose? Where do you want to live? Most people want to stay where they are. Some people want to move. Leisure and volunteer activities. You need to think of what you're going to do instead of working. You want to make sure you have good health insurance and that your legal affairs are in order. And that's that.